also introduce Henna Tehman, who is showcasing Pakistan. And she has been teaching English for the past 8 years at lower secondary and secondary levels in private schools in Pakistan and at an international school in Dubai. She is a YLE and a CET and a CAE speaking examiner and a CELT-S and CELT-P tutor. And currently she's working as an administrator of a primary school. So over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone attending this webinar from around the world. It's an exciting opportunity to be here with you, sharing ideas and getting a response from all over the world. And it's an honor for me. And thank you to IATEFL for giving the opportunity to speak in front of the worldwide audience. Today, my topic is about integrating local culture during lower secondary English lessons in Pakistan. So why do I need to think about that topic? I've been teaching for the past 8 years at different levels and both locally and international school. And what I found is that the students in Pakistan, though they study English from an early age, still they don't feel confident enough to speak or write in English, and they don't enjoy their English lessons much. And the reason behind that is they're not able to connect or relate to the content that is there in their textbooks. So that's why I'll be talking about the local culture integration in English language classroom in the context of Pakistan. So what you can expect from this session today is, first of all, I'm going to give you an introduction and shed some light on the importance of learning English in the context of Pakistan and how important it is and at what level do learners usually start learning English language in Pakistan. Secondly, why it is necessary to embed local culture in English language classroom. What does it have? What impact does it have on learning? And what difference does it make in learning in language acquisition? And thirdly, how? How we can include local culture. That's actually the main focus of today's webinar, how we can embed local culture in teaching English language. And we'll explore different pedagogies that can help us achieve this aim. And I'll be using or I'll be sharing some personal experiences that I've tried in my own classrooms, and I found them quite useful and effective. And I felt that that had created an impact in learning English in a better way, in a lively way. And I would love to hear from everybody who is attending this webinar that what kind of strategies you use in your classroom or what kind of problems you come across while you're teaching English in a context where English is taught as a second language. And in the end, there's going to be a question answer session. I'd love to answer any kind of questions that you have related to this webinar. Okay, so first, when we talk about English in the context of Pakistan, we know that English is the only language which is widely used in most part of the world, and it provides a base for modern education and modern knowledge. When we talk about Pakistan, English is being taught as a compulsory subject here. And the major source of learning English in our country is the schools and the formal classroom. And the problem with that is that the focus of attention is the syntax and grammar rules, which makes it quite boring for the learners. I would like to hear from the audience that what's the focus in your countries? Do you feel the same? Do you feel that the same problem lies there in the classrooms in your context as well, or not? Yes, so yeah, he says that yes, that's how it happens. Um, and you come across the similar kind of problems. We actually don't make it very lively session for them or an active way of learning the language. We just make it grammar rules, and then that's why they struggle when it comes to real life application of the language. So, as I said, that English is a compulsory subject, but they're still unable to communicate with confidence, and don't see that success in it. And and the reason is not that there's lack of competence. It's just that the teaching pedagogies needs to be reshuffled for that, so that we can make them the lessons more engaging and lively for them, so that they can come back to the classrooms and enjoy. And you must see that the kind of image that I have on my slide, that's what represent our Pakistani students when they come back to the English classroom. They're not happy. They feel that it's a foreign language for them. They started as a foreign language and they end up as a foreign. They do not take away anything from their classrooms that they can apply in their real life. Um, yes, and that's yes, I can see that it's the same in Saudi Arabia and Sudan and most of the countries. That's the problem that we come across. Um, Before we move on to the next part, we need to understand why is it important to integrate local culture. Now, local culture that we have in English language teaching is not regarded as an obstacle. It is actually a tool that helps the learners acquire the language um, in a lively way, and this is something that they can relate to. And but how does that happen? How can we do that? That is the main part that I'm going to discuss in my talk about how we integrate local culture and what are the different ways that we can apply. Um, Here, I would like to quote that each culture function as a learning tool to develop mental functions in learning. Now, what does that mean? It is important to familiarize the learners with the content that they're learning, and that familiarity with the content actually reduces the foreignness of the new language. They feel it as a language that they feel it as a language that they can use in their context as well. And they feel confident using that. Um, as Jenkins says, that content familiarity assists students to make sense of the lessons and validate the sense with the utilization of their own framework. Like if I'm giving them content that they can relate to, they'll find it useful, and they'll have the actual the practical use of learning that language, and that's how they will be more interested in learning that. So basically, there are different ways before we move on to why or how it is important or how we can integrate culture. We need to understand that what is basically the culture that counts in language learning. So when we talk about culture, it's about the places, the cuisines, the social habits, what you believe in, what your values are. All these different aspects are included in culture. And whenever a students learning English, he comes across the culture that he hasn't experienced. He come across places that he hasn't visited, or he comes across cuisines, the food that he has never tasted or seen. Probably they see it in movies or on TV, but they haven't experienced it themselves. Uh, that's why it reduces the interest, and psychologically the learners are under the pressure of learning English, and this traumatic experience lasts during their learning for years. That's why I feel that local culture should be integrated in English language to create that friendly learning environment where they enjoy their learning, where they're ready to express their ideas. um, Now, when we know why it is important, it's also important to know that how we can integrate culture. What are the different ways that we can make it happen in a regular classroom? Um, how to integrate local culture is through three different ways that I feel that I have tried and tested myself. One is selecting appropriate material, developing learning content, designing learning tasks and activities. I would also like to know that what kind of activities or what kind of strategies you use to make your English lesson more friendly, and more culturally apt for your students. Um, yes, I'd be discussing different examples, that what kind of problems do I come across when I discuss something that is in the class, which they don't have an exposure to. In the next slides, uh, I'll be coming across different examples for that. So, selecting appropriate material. Now, whatever content is there in your textbooks, yes, you can use them, but at every now and then, I believe that there should be a proper selection of material as well. Um, in the previous sessions, Kalpita and David actually talked about authentic material, and I can't agree more to that. Whenever you are teaching something in the classroom, the use of authentic material is very, very important. Now, what is authentic material? Something that they can really see in their real world, something they come across, and something that they experience. I'll give you an example of the authentic material that I've used and how it has worked in my context. And I'm sure that it would be useful in any kind of context that you are teaching. So, for my lower secondary students, I used a text that was about Pakistani youth's visit to the US, and it was an article from a newspaper, and they enjoyed it. Now, what was the reason behind that? Firstly, it was about they did not have that sense of foreignness in it. The names that were used were local names, so they could connect to that, they could understand that. They felt that it is about someone who belonged to us, who we can relate to, whose names we are familiar with. And then it was from Pakistan. The students delegation was from Pakistan. Apart from that, the school who sent those students, the name of the school was familiar to them. They could feel that that is what is actually happening. That's what in real world is happening. That's what they know about the school. They know about where it exists and what kind of students are there in that. So that kind of feeling, when they were excited to read about that text. They had discussions. They talked about different aspects of that article, and yes, they were doing it as a comprehension text, but the level of interest was different, and the only reason was that it was something that they could relate to. So for receptive skill, the use of authentic material is very, very important. Same is the case with whether it's a reading material or a listening material. You can make use of that so that the students can relate to it and find it in their own culture, in their own surrounding, and find it interesting. Apart from that, when it comes to productive skills, we also need to make use of content that is relevant to the culture. Now, what you can do on that, if I'm asking them to giving them a topic related to instructional writing, and I ask them to write a recipe of a hamburger, and they don't know what a hamburger is, or what the recipe of that is, or how does it taste like. Obviously, they're not going to have any interest in that. But if I ask them to come across something that they have tasted, they have tried, they know about, any kind of a local dish, let's say I ask them paratha roll or biryani, and I ask them to write instructions for that, they would be able to choose their own content for it. They would be able to talk about it. They will be interested in writing about it because this is something that they had experienced. And when they have experienced something, they would be able to come up with describing that, come up with writing about it and explaining it, which is quite interesting. So I'd like to know that in your context, what kind of authentic material have you used and how useful have you found them? Have they been as effective as I found them in my classroom? Or is there something different? Yes, that's also for cross-cultural discussions are also a very good idea. And that's what I'm going to discuss in my next slide as well, that how that can help in creating interest in your language classrooms. Okay. Um, the next point that we have here is uh, developing the learning content. Now, when we are developing the learning content, it also depends on the teacher. Again, selection of material is dependent on the teacher, that you select the relevant kind of material for your students according to their understanding, according to their level. Developing learning content is also very, very important because no textbooks perfectly integrate language and culture. So teachers need to make cultural supplemental activities as a part of their language classrooms. I'll give you again some examples that I've used in my classroom and how students have enjoyed learning about them. So one was there was a short story in one of the readers in eighth grade, and it was about the surfies. Now, surfing is a kind of water sport that is not popular, that's not played in Pakistan. So students do not have any idea about that, how it feels like, how it's played, and all that. So I had to show them through a video to give them a feel what it is and how it's played, to get them interested in that sports. But then at the end of the lesson, there was a writing task that was related based on what you had read in the text. You need to create a story. Um, and I made them write whatever was there in the textbook, the task that was given. Um, and I was not happy. I was not happy with the writing that they came up with. So the next day, when I went back to the class, I redid the same activity and I asked them that let's not write about surfing. Write about the sports that you like and that you have played. So they came up with cricket that they have experienced, they play and they enjoy, and most of Pakistanis love to play cricket. Some of them came up with football, and there was a complete contrast. If I compared the previous writing and the writing which they liked, I could see a marked difference and improvement in the kind of writing that had. So their productive skills were improved, and they were interested to write about that. Same was the case with another where they were asked to write an autobiography, or write a biography. Uh, and the text was about JF Kennedy. So nobody knew about, they had no knowledge about JF Kennedy, so they had no idea who he is. And later on, they were asked to write, based on the information that was given, to write about JF Kennedy, a biography of him. So instead of giving them the same time, I developed the learning content and I asked them to come up with a biography of a person from their own context, like from Pakistan. So I gave them a sports person and I gave them a political person, and gave them a choice. And all of a sudden, I could see that liveliness in the classroom. They had information to share with each other. I started off with the pair activity, and they had the information, they had read about them, they had heard about them, they discussed the ideas, they picked up their topic, and they wrote about it. So basically the point is that when they know what is relevant to them, they're more interested in talking about it, in writing about it, and in speaking about it. So sometimes, yes, students struggle with the foreign names. You're very right. And then they don't feel connected, and they also find it hard to pronounce. And they, most of the times, they would struggle in pronouncing them, and still they would not be sure that whether they're pronouncing it the right way or not. So that hesitance is there, that fear is there that we would go wrong with that. And at times, yes, you're right that whether that's a male name or a female name. So that was the same was the case with another text that they had to write about Eskimos. Now they do not have any exposure of or any experience of how to live in the snow. We don't have that much snow here in most of the countries, but they're very well aware of how it feels when it's really hot weather. So I asked them to read the text and about the Eskimo girl. And now imagine yourself being in a hot, sunny day in Pakistan in summers. So compare and contrast the problems that you come across and the problem that Eskimo girl comes across. So that compare and contrast technique was really useful, and they could very easily come up with the vocab, the words that they could express their feelings in, and they could find some kind of connection to what they were doing, and that created that interest. Yes, it also depends upon the age the students are in. But most of the cases where even if we consider the schools that have students coming from a very good background also have struggled are also struggling with finding out or understanding the English culture or the terms that are being used. So apart from that, I have also asked them that compare and contrast. Not don't just focus on, as Kalpita in the previous session has pointed out, that we go for the visuals as well. Look at the pictures and look at the visuals that are given or headlines that are given or the title that is there in the text, and try to pick up some information from that. Um, like there was a text about London and visiting different places in London. Now, none of the students, yes, they did know about some of the places, but they could not give you much information about those places because they only knew about the names or they've seen the pictures. But when I asked them to compare that with one of the cities in Pakistan, they were able to come across good feedback, good writing tasks for that. They knew that which areas are most visited ones, what's the importance of one area or another, and how it happens. It's the same with London, the different places that are there in there. Another important thing was that when students were writing stories, I asked them to use local names so that they know who they are writing about. Talk about rather than Tom or Sarah, use Ali and Samina in your stories because you would be able to connect to them, and also use some local terminologies. Now, when I introduced it for the first time, along with and I gave this idea to the rest of my colleagues, and they said that is it a good idea to introduce local terms in English language? And I said that yes, that there's nothing wrong with that, because I'll give you an example of. The image that you see here in the slide, charpoy, which is a kind of a bed that is used, but the the context of bed is completely different from a charpoy. It's made in a different way, it's used in a little different way. So I asked the students to use the same word for it, and they were actually excited that we could use the terms that we know, we familiar with in our writing. They were quite excited about it and they loved the idea. So that's how they tried to use, and I tried to make them interested in what they were learning, what they were writing about, what they were speaking about. All that makes a complete difference in their classrooms. Um, yeah, yes, and um, the next task that I would like to know is designing tasks and activities. So that's the last part that we are talking about. I gave them a project where they had to design different activities. Like one of them was local newspaper designed by students. So what have you done in your classroom,
I
designed
think you have to. I'm sorry, we're
activities
going to
that
have
help the
to
students to learn that?
continue.
I think I'm running out of time. Um, yeah, okay. Yeah, it was lovely having this discussion with the audience,
Well,
and I was
thank
getting some
you. Thank you. I
responses from
think it was
them.
a
Lovely to have this
really
session.
interesting, very
Thank you,
useful talk,
Jennifer. I
and
think that's the
particularly for
end of
such a world
the
audience because
session.
everyone's having the same similar problems, aren't they? We're all over the world.
Thank you.
So yeah. So thank you very much.
Yes, yes, I could
Bye.
see that they could relate
Bye.
to.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank